Aloha and welcome to Your Heart Magic, an illuminating space where psychology, spirituality and heart wisdom meet. Here's your host, Dr. BethAnne Wright, the clinical psychologist with a mystic mind.
Aloha, everybody. Welcome to Your Heart Magic. This is Dr. BethAnne Wright. And today we are talking about the topic, bringing your Akashic Records into the everyday. And we are going to look at how can you feel more empowered to work with your own records? How can you feel empowered to create a perspective or a mindset shift that helps you see you already are working with your own records and have a better sense of how that is actually happening on a day-to-day basis? We're also going to be touching base on a little bit of an energy update with the Akashic Records and what they've had to say for the collective for the year 2023. So today it's all things Akashic. And I love talking about the records. So this is a fabulous topic. I thought I would start with sharing how this topic not only came through, but how it kind of evolved over the week. Because often on this podcast, we are talking about not just psychology, but spirituality. And how do we really carve out a path of personal spirituality and learn to work with the signs and synchronicities and information coming through and presenting itself to us, and how do we learn to trust, and how do we learn to follow that, and how do we learn to live more intuitively? And something that I think can often be a really big stumbling block for many individuals is that we expect information to come through in a more obvious way than it often does, or we expect it to look differently than what shows up. So sometimes intuitive hits and intuitive knowing and signs and synchronicities are happening all around us, but we question it and we doubt it, and we don't always realize, just lean in and follow the flow. Like, stay curious, see where this leads. You don't have to interpret it right away or know what it means. Just stay with it. And I hope that one of the things that this podcast does is continues to help remind all of us that living intuitively and trusting our soul is really about receiving and trusting the path and allowing it to show itself to us. It's not always about knowing precisely where it's going. And that is such a beautiful reflection of how this week's podcast episode came to be. Last week, when I was wrapping up the topic and introducing this week's topic, I shared the words, bringing your Akashic Records into the everyday. And often what happens with episodes on this podcast is something will come into my mind as the topic that we're going to talk about. Sometimes it's just the theme, but sometimes I'll hear a very specific phrase or a specific set of words, and I won't always know what that means. I might have some sort of an idea, but I won't know exactly how that might want to coalesce. But I've learned to trust it. And I've learned not to over question or doubt myself and say, I don't know how to talk about that, or I don't know what that's leading to. I've learned that when I sit down to bring information through for the episode, that if I open myself up to inspiration, if I open my channel up and say Akashic Records and angels and other light beings that I'm connected with, come on through. If I open myself up to the information that might already be swimming somewhere in the cauldron of my own mind and kind of trust all of that to come together, then it will create this beautiful alchemy. And often the talking points and the things I feel inspired to share come from that matrix of just going into the space of help me see what I need to see to share with everybody. And I feel that it's a collaborative effort and a dance between myself and spirit, which is really fun. And what happened this last week with this episode is I wasn't exactly sure what wanted to be talked about on the show, but I stayed with it. And I happened to do, earlier in the week, I happened to do a show. My friend Monsef Avkir does a show called Your Divine uniqueness. I was a guest on it this week, and my topic was the Akashic Records and the evolution of the light. And I was talking about on the show how the record's called 2023, The Evolution of the Light, and giving an update of some of the energies that I'm feeling might be shifting and happening for that as we move into the second half of 2023. I'm really fascinated by the collective theme this year. I think it's a really interesting one. And I think that how I might respond to what is the evolution of the light, and my understanding of that will probably be different by the end of the year than it is right now, because as something's evolving, we don't always have a sense of this is exactly what it's evolving into. Right now, what I would say is the evolution of the light is something that is happening collectively. It is happening through the people. It is happening energetically. It's happening cosmically. It is happening with the earth and shifts that the planet is going through. And so all these systems are intersecting and connecting and working together to evolve things into a space where there is more connectivity, more authenticity, more light, more that feels like physical and immaterial light, and then light inside of ourselves as light workers and spiritual beings, where we will feel more emboldened and empowered to be authentic, to step into our soul sovereignty in more powerful ways. We will continue to move away from what does not feel truthful to us to what might feel like it is not necessarily dark, but what prevents us from feeling a greater sense of light. We will move towards that truth. And as we do so, that too is the evolution of the light. It is us, and it is how our journeys evolve. And again, this is all happening collectively. So that's what I got on the show and talked about and answered some questions about what's to come in the year and some other information about that. And then I open it up to the audience for Q&A, which is really fun for me to do. I don't do things like this very often anymore. And so I never know what questions I'm going to be asked. And it is just this act of trust for me that in the moment, I will be able to tap into the intuitive information of what that individual needs to know. And what I found is that I received a lot of questions on, I'm so fascinated by the Akashic Records. How can I work with them in my daily life? How can I feel more empowered to understand my records? How are the records different than maybe other gifts, or just like using my intuition? Like, what can I learn being in the records? I just got so many great questions that were literally this reflection of this topic today, the idea of bringing your Akashic Records into the everyday. And obviously, when that topic came into my head, I did not anticipate that I would receive so many questions about the Akashic Records during this interview and show I did this week. And that was so much of what it was about. It was so much empowering guidance, and often empowering guidance that came through for somebody if they were asking a specific question, like, how do I heal this particular wound in my life? Or is there any information that comes through on that? Some of the guidance that I would be receiving was how the person could work with their own records to write a story of healing into the records, to write a story of growth into their own records. And it was just empowering. It was beautiful. And now I get to turn around and share some of those talking points with everybody who's listening here and take this message to more people. So I think the first thing that we want to realize with the idea of our Akashic Records is that they already are in our day-to-day. So if you're new to the records, then they might not even be on your radar, and it's probably something that you haven't realized. If you have heard of the records before, but you had this idea that somehow somebody else is an Akashic Records reader and not you, or somehow the records are for somebody else, but not you. What I would say to that is for those who are called to really read the Akashic Records. They will often be called to do it for somebody else. They might be called to do collective readings. Those are both things that I've been experienced as an Akashic Records reader. And so when I work with the records, it's often on behalf of the collective or on somebody else's behalf if they came to me to receive an intuitive reading. I will work with my own. Not as often as maybe you would think. I've had questions throughout the years of like, don't you just want to be in them all the time? And a little bit when I first learned how to do this, like I definitely had that sense of like a kid with a new toy, and probably like every single day opened them and went into them and was getting acquainted with the energy and really started to find the value of being able to say like, hey, I'm going to this social event later today and I feel kind of nervous. Some of the people there I like, some of the people not as much, but I feel like I need to go. And so what guidance do you have for me in order to move through this and have the most fun possible? This is something I actually asked once. And I received this beautiful guidance from the records where they kind of showed me a pecking order with this particular group. Kind of, or I guess roosters or something like that, birds, and how oftentimes like there's in nature some sort of like hierarchy, and they gave this guidance that some groups are organized a little bit hierarchical based on different contributions to the group. And at that time, I was really moving away from that and not really interested in some of those things. And so the guidance that came through was like, be an observer of that, like be like an anthropologist, observe those dynamics. Don't feel like you need to be pulled into them. Don't feel like you need to like carve out your own place. Just be an observer of the dynamics, enjoy people for who they are, and don't get pulled into any of the sticky things that, I was picking up on. I just thought that was beautiful guidance. It was so practical. It really resonated with me with the particular situation that I was talking about. And it really freed my heart to go participate in something and not be so sticky, not get stuck to. Sometimes we get wrapped up and why do people act like that? Why is there this dynamic? And I just went in such a more clear place of just expect to be an observer. And that was so helpful and so beautiful for me. And so I opened them on all sorts of things, but oftentimes it would be day-to-day advice, things that I was struggling with. And I loved it. What I often found is that, like with anything, you get used to it after a while. And sometimes there might not be anything new that my records can tell me about something, especially if I've already asked about it. Sometimes I like to just muddle through it in my own human mind. I love receiving higher perspective, but sometimes I also like I don't know if luxury is the right word, but I like just being able to, before I even reach for higher perspective, and put myself in that really open-hearted space to work with the records. I like to just feel what I feel and kind of be in that messy human space. But going back to what I was saying, that there's a difference between somebody who reads records for many people versus you feeling empowered to work with your own records. So if you are interested in them and you don't see yourself as that, then this episode is for you. And it is to empower you to feel the freedom to know that you have the sovereign right to work with your own records. You have the right to learn about them, to ground this idea for yourself, to educate yourself on it if you're interested in it, and to feel empowered that every single day you are helping write the energy into your records through your choices, through your actions, through your will, and through the energy that you choose to create every day. One of the most important things that we need to remember in our records is that the future is still largely unwritten. And when we are working with the future of our records, there is so much space to seed the intention and seed the energy of what we might like to create within our own Akashic home, within our own book of Akashic. And there are some things that maybe our soul has a plan that are either going to happen or some things in our soul blueprint that might already be in the future of a record. For example, if somebody asks me often, like, what's my purpose or what's my soul path, or I feel like there's something more I'm meant to be doing, I will easily be able to see that in the future, they are meant to maybe do something like write a book or teach a meditation group or make a career change. Sometimes it's not specific. Often it will not be, in the year 2027, I see your record saying that you are going to leave the job and there's a move destined for you at that time where you are going to like move across the ocean and go into an entirely new career path. And it has something to do with medicine. Like, this is not like fortune telling. And for me, it's usually never that specific. And part of the reason is the more we look into the future, the more unwritten it is, the more possibilities are transforming right now. The energy is transforming right now within the Akashic field itself. And specifically within the year 2023, the possibilities are so expansive right now because so much has shifted. And when we talk about the evolution of the light, in a spiritual sense, I believe that has to do with an evolution of possibilities as well. There are so many individuals over the last few years who feel like either their intuitive gifts are taken off, or maybe they have really grounded a sense that they are working with the angels or earth medicine or higher dimensional beings. Maybe they have felt more empowered to do somatic work, chakra work, something like that. A lot of people who are interested in spirituality have seen an increase and an amplification and growth in their gifts over the last few years. And I think that receiving of talents and gifts and what feels like an activation of talents and gifts that many of us either had a natural propensity for, maybe there's some past life stuff there, but many of those things have been awakened, activated, amplified over the last few years. And so we're feeling more empowered to do those things. And when we're more empowered and we're more open, there's more space. And where there's more space, things tend to be less set in stone. So when you want to know, why is it so hard to predict the future? Not going into Nostradamus or any of those, I haven't really looked at that. I have nothing intelligent to add in the moment of how some people from way back when were able to make these predictions. I suspect they had some sort of strong spiritual channel and some outside upper information that helped them. But for the average light worker who's walking around living day-to-day life right now in the year 2023, if we look at what's going to happen in the future, it's very likely to change by the time we get there. So many times with the future in somebody's records, I'll see themes. I will see generalities. I will have a sense of, yeah, you're supposed to do something more intuitive with your gifts. And then I might say, what lights you up? Like when you think about, what are you curious about? What do you see somebody else doing? And you get really inspired and think, oh my gosh, I'd love to do something like that. I don't know how to create it, but I'd love to do something that like has that essence or that energy. That's the stuff that sets your soul on fire. That's the stuff you want to write into your records and become an active narrator within your field of possibilities, saying, I don't know how I'm going to accomplish this. I don't know what it looks like, but I feel lit up when I think about doing these things. And so I want to create a future where I have space to do the things that make me feel lit up. And I want to create a future where I am guided to ground that vision. So I don't just have all these ideas floating about of what I could do, but I feel empowered to pick one and at least pick a starting place and begin to develop it so that you've created like a platform or a landing place and things can begin to grow from that. That is often how energy works. It tends to kind of pause and wait for us to pick something or make a decision, especially if something isn't predestined or we're not being strongly guided in a direction. And it's more like, I really feel like I should teach courses on spirituality, and your angels and guides are like, yeah. And your records are like, yep, that's in your records. You are a teacher. You are talented. And so often the next question is, but what should I teach? Or like, I don't even know where to start. And so sometimes your angels and guides will have ideas to give you. Sometimes the records will. And, I'll say, well, you're very gifted at being an empath. You learn quite a bit on how to manage that gift. Have you ever considered teaching about that? But a lot of times what we are doing, because remember, we are empowered to free choice and free will, and to empowered to choose our adventure. A lot of times the energy is kind of pausing, and that next chapter in the records is pausing, waiting for us to say, well, there's 3 or 4 great things I could teach about, and I'm going to have to trust that if I'm meant to walk this path, I'll probably teach on all of them. But right now I have to start somewhere. So I'm going to teach on intuition development. I'm just going to start there and trust that all these other topics maybe will come into it somehow. And then often is when the steps begin to line up, or our angels are able to bring us our next step. Then is when we are seeding that energy in the Akashic Records and said, okay, now I made a decision. It is in resonance with my heart, and the energy itself begins to respond to what we're putting out there so that that next action step can be created. So whether or not you think of these things as your Akashic Records, each of us every day is already working within our records through intention, through what we're putting out there, through our willpower, through trying to allow the path to unfold in front of ourselves. And when we're doing that, I think it's really helpful to acknowledge the record's presence in our life. And so one of the things that I like to tell people is start making friends with your records. Start thinking of them as something that is real in your life. If you're ready for that, if this is still an out there concept for you, awesome. Keep taking a survey course. Just learn more about the records, see what you think about the Akashic, keep educating yourself and finding teachers and spaces that teach on that. But if you're like, yeah, I think this is something real, I think the records are really cool, I want to keep growing my relationship with them, awesome. Be in relationship with them. We cannot grow our relationship with something if we're not in relationship with it and we're not acknowledging it. And so one of the most valuable things we can do in bringing spirit into the everyday, bringing the Akashic Records into the everyday, bringing the angels into the everyday, is the acknowledgement of it, and say, hello, I know you're there. Hi, records. Today I am writing into you a great day. And I am going to create like really great energy. Or maybe you're in a horrible mood and you say, records, today I'm writing into you kindness. I need like some mercy and an SOS right now. Star friends going under. This is how I talk to them sometimes if I'm having one of those days. And I'm like, so I'm writing into it support and bringing in support today. But if you think of your records, because your records are, even though they're an energetic consciousness and an energetic database, they are kept by your angels and your guides. They're not just like drifting out there in the cosmos where anybody can access them or stumble into them. They are sacred. And one of the reasons that we treat the records with reverence is because they're not just meant to be opened by anybody with any old intention. I've spoken about this before on here, but it's not spiritually ethical to like open somebody's records without their permission. It's like walking through their home without an invitation. And my understanding is really the records themselves won't let you in. Whatever the person might think they're accessing, it's not the other person's records, because the Akashic Records are kept at the frequency of unconditional love. They are kept in that open-hearted space of realizing that everybody has a soul plan and a soul path. And in the eyes of the light, there is unconditional love and grace available for all. So if we're going into the records with an intention that's not in vibration with that, then we're not really going into the records. So your records aren't floating around where just anybody could step into them. They are connected to your heart energy. They are connected to your light team, we'll call it, your light beings. They are protected by those things. You have the sacred right to access them. You have the right, if you'd like somebody to access them on your behalf, to say, I want a reading, or I want to grow, or I want mentorship with this. Help me figure more out about my records. So you have all those rights. So you have the right to make friends with them. And even though the records might be a collection of energy, I love the idea of just thinking of them as your friend and thinking of them as this supportive aspect of your life that you can work with every single day and say, I want to write a new story today. And I think that is one of the most effective ways to actually ground the idea of how do we work with our own records. And I'll go over a little bit if you want to access some easy ways to do that. But what I was really thinking about is this idea that every single day we are writing a story into our records. As we said, we're doing that through our will and our intention and our beliefs and our attitude, and how often we open to love and how often we close to love and stay in a space of fear. The work we do when we're clearing trauma and karma, all of those things are shifting the energy around us. And since our records are an energetic reflection, not only of our experiences, but our energy itself, we are writing that metaphorically into the records as we do that work. So I love the idea of really thinking about using vision boards or intention list as like the energy that you are seeding in the future of your records and saying, if there's all sorts of possibilities open to me right now at this particular point in time, this possibility is the best that I can envision. And so I'm going to make my intention list. And I like to do a guided meditation around this where I will look at my intentions, and I really like color. And so I will think, like, what color are these? For myself, often it will come through as like all these swirling rainbow colors, or more like these diamondy rainbow colors or something like that. And I will picture that energy, those colors just like pouring into this kind of cosmic library that represents my personal records. That is a simple guided meditation. It is based on using my imagination to intentionally visualize some image of the records. And I'm taking the energy that I just wrote about, the intention that I just wrote about, and I'm using the energy of color medicine, to kind of send into the records and saying, I want more rainbow. I want more like sparkly diamond light. I want these things that light me up. When we do that, we are writing a new story in our records. And it was really interesting. Years ago, back in, it was 2011. That was the time of my life that I had gone through a divorce, and I was really refinding who I was as a single woman in my early-ish 30s, who'd been married for almost 12 years and then together with somebody for almost 13. And I did not know much about how to do life apart from that, but I was learning. And I had a lot of baggage going through some of the stuff from the divorce. I've shared a little bit about that on here before. Suffice it to say, it was not easy. Much of it was unkind. And so I had a lot of stuff to work through that happened around that time. And I really started using writing as a processing tool at that point in time to process my feelings. I found a voice for myself in writing. I would write about these things almost like somebody was reading them, like I was telling a story. It's just the voice that kind of developed. It wasn't this raw processed stream of thoughts. You know, I wrote it almost like a letter saying, like, this is what happened. This is how I felt, really allowing myself to express things. And even if I was talking about something really dark or gritty or difficult, what I often did is I would end these little essays, I guess we can call them, with some sort of a like up twist, whatever it was. So if I was writing about feeling bitter and letting go of relationships where I thought maybe the individual was a friend and would be in my life long term, and somehow like it didn't survive the divorce. Divorce can be very divisive often, and some people are by default kind of fall on one side over the other. There's no harm intended. Sometimes there's definitely a sense of people taking sides. And I was just taking everything to heart so much. There was definitely a sense of taking sides. Some very hurtful things were said. And then I'm sure I took my big old empath heart and my tissue paper, highly sensitive skin, and some of it seemed like even worse than what it really might have been. So I had like all these like wounds in my heart and all these perceptions that of how people thought of me. And I really didn't want that bitterness inside of me. So I would like allow myself to write about how angry I was and write about some of the hypocrisy that I saw, like really kind of call things out on paper and do a deep dive into understanding the dynamics of what I was seeing happening around me. That was really helpful. But what I would bring it to in the end was almost like, here's the moral of the story, though. Like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to turn into that person that becomes somebody with that degree of judgment inside of them. Like, I don't want the burden of carrying around bitterness or heaviness towards somebody or judging their path without knowing anything about it. I don't want the weight of anger or bitterness because of what I perceived people did or wrongdoings. And so I would write these endings about becoming and about freeing myself from that and about finding a better way and learning to grow into a bigger person. And I'd write about finding forgiveness, not for their sake, but for mine. And I would write about the person that I wanted to become. That's so important. I wrote about the person I wanted to become. And about 4 or 5 months into this process, I remember having one of those moments where you kind of see things in a more transcendent space and it comes together with a sense of clarity. And I really realized that I was turning into the person that I was writing about, that I was going through this metaphorical transformation before my own eyes. I was living this process of going through a deconstruction, a reconstruction of self, a re-identification with self. And that the more I did that, the more I was seeing myself grow into a more open-hearted person, somebody who was able to, if not necessarily forgive in an instant. I think that's a hard one for many of us, unless you have been working on the art of forgiveness for a very long time. I was able to catch myself when I was getting trapped in like unforgiveness or bitterness or the weeds that kind of pull us down and keep us really stuck in these more toxic energies. And I was able to like go about the work of starting to like weed that out of my garden, or at least know, oh, there's a weed here. I got to get that pulled out and do what I need to get rid of it. And I really saw myself becoming a more free-spirited person, a more adventurous person, a more generous, joyful person. All of those things that I was writing them into being. And I remember at the time having this sense of like, oh my gosh, it's almost like I'm writing this living book. And as I'm evolving into like the stuff that I'm writing. And I would see these weird synchronicities where I might say something like, I yearn to be the kind of person whose heart is free and unfettered. I really identified back then with like inspirational posters where you might see a heart with wings on it. And it was like, and then one day she freed herself, and walked away from the old and moved into the new, or these kinds of sort of very simple aphorisms with like this really fun art. But maybe I would write something like that in my journal. And then a week later, I'd be like in a little gift shop and I would be like, oh my gosh, did that poster read my mind? There was like a whole line of like cards and art out by a cool group of women back then. I think some of them are still creating now. And it would say basically what I just wrote, and I'd never seen their work before. Or I would write about wanting to accept all aspects of myself and, be more like the moon, who, is know she's whole in any stage. And then maybe I'd go outside and like this brilliant moon would be out there. I was just having these things where I was like, what is responding to what I'm writing? Because the synchronicities were undeniable. And I think that is us when we do things like that. I think we're writing energy into our records. Remember, our records might hold the collection of our experiences, and our like multiplicity of lives, but they reflect us. They reflect our soul path. They reflect our current energy. They reflect the current energies in our life. They reflect the future possibilities. They are a mirror of some of the energies that compose who we are. So when we work with energy through words and we mindfully write something, I think that we are writing those energies and those synchronicities into being through our records. So just a fun way of looking at it. But if you want to bring the Akashic Records into the every day in your journal or once a week in your journal, whenever you go in, write a new page into your records. What do you want for this upcoming season in life? What do you want to manifest? What do you want to heal? What do you want to clear? What might that look like? If things felt a little bit better or you saw a little bit more progress on the path, what would you like? When I said, I want to make a podcast, this was years ago. It took me a long time to ground it and have the space to do it. But I remember back in February, when I was first releasing this and, starting out at ground zero, episode 1, nobody knew it existed. I told a few friends. The first episode had like 3 listeners or something like that, but it was all good because I had long-term plans. I was going to keep growing this. And I remember like visualizing around seeing where I had 20 episodes out, where I had, I don't remember what it was. I think at the time it was 20 episodes and 200 downloads, because that was enough of a stretch in my mind that it felt like reasonable and like I could grow and I could get there. Well, today's episode 23. We passed 10,000 downloads a couple of weeks back, so I haven't looked at where things are at, but we blew that 200 out of the water. And I think that intentioning was all about writing into the records. I want to do this. It lights my heart up. I want this to become a place that more people know about, where they can tap in, tune in, and receive not only spiritual, but like grounded psychological information. And they have permission to explore these things for themselves in a really empowered way. So I'm writing that chapter in my records as I continue to move forward with this. So some of working with our records every day is a matter of perspective, and it's just a matter of realizing you already are and just naming it for what it is. And so if you are somebody who maybe works with the angels, or you just say, thank you, Spirit, thank you for supporting me, or you make a gratitude list, add your records to it. Thank you, angels, and thank you, Akashic, for helping me create like the possibility of today. Today was a really great day, or thank you, angels, and thank you, Akashic, for supporting me and helping me make it through a day that was really hard right now. Just start including them. For me, even though they are connected to specific beings, I almost treat them as their own entity, because they are a little bit different than the individual beings that are keepers of them, and the energy is a little bit different. So make friends with them. Start to feel empowered to write your stories into your records. You always have the opportunity to write a new story. And one thing that we can think about is if there's things in our past that we don't like, we can work with our records to write healing into it, to write relief into it, to write transmutation of trauma into it. Something very powerful, and I've shared this before on here, is that I had this message from the records right around the end of the year 2020, where the records said the records were going through a mass clearing. And how this clearing was happening was the transformation of trauma within the records. And that a lot of old gunk, if you want to call it that, was being cleared out of the records. Now, remember, the records are a coding, they are an energetic expression. So if you think about collectively where collective wounds are that have not been brought out into the light, bitterness is there, right? Resentment is there, maybe woundedness is there, pain is there. When we haven't healed something, we haven't felt it, we haven't done any work around it, and it's in the shadows of the unconscious, there is a wound there often. And when there's a wound there, there's often gunk. There is stuck energy. There is unhealed energy. There's a lack of resolution. So when we are working on transforming trauma in our lives and we're doing our individual work, we are helping transform some of those collective stuck points in the records. When we have done our work around something, even if it hurts and it's something painful, but we know how we feel about it. We're not reacting from unprocessed feelings. We know maybe there's grief there. Maybe we know there's loss there. Maybe we had to work through a lot of anger to come to more of a space of peace or forgiveness. There's more movement there. And there's less trauma there. And so some of the density that was being kept because something was heavy, it was unprocessed, there was not space for the light in it because it had not been looked at. All of a sudden, the light is shining into those places, and there's more room for healing to take place. There's more room for somebody to take that trauma and create a movement, make art, write a story about it, become a little bit softer and kinder because they've learned more compassion. When we bring light into those spaces, we open up space. So when the records talk about this idea that they are clearing themselves out and they're clearing old energies and clearing trauma, much of how that is happening is just in our individual hearts as we do our own work. And the more people who do that, the more it comes together collectively and the more space that it clears. So if you are working on your healing right now and you have things in the records, your records, things in your past that still feel really heavy, maybe just write a note of healing for yourself and write a new chapter that says, and then one day they found the courage to heal themselves a little bit more, and they found the next key they needed to free their heart. You don't even have to know what that means. You don't have to know what that is. You can write it like a narrative, kind of like to be continued. We'll see what that is, but seed that energy of healing if there's things that you want to release. And then one day they realized the only thing that was keeping them stuck was themselves, or the light bulb went on and they found the epiphany they needed to move forward, or whatever it is you want to manifest. You can write that in. So we can work with our history and write it into our records of how we would like to heal that and transform that. And there's a little bit of narrative therapy, I think, that's involved in that, like expressive arts therapy, where a lot of times writing exercises like that might be used in therapy, or like a writing coaching shop that's about a coaching workshop or something that's about healing. But I'm like, just because it's called something different doesn't mean that it's not still writing that energy into your records. So many of you are already doing these things. You just didn't even know that it was working with your records. So now you do. And I hope that you feel empowered to continue to do that. If you are wanting to just work with your records on an everyday basis, I'm just going to make a few quick suggestions. There's a few things that I think are helpful to do. One of them is just an open heart and the intention of, I want to start accessing my Akashic Records. I would just set a real intention around that. And then it is helpful, I think, to say some sort of prayer or something. Traditionally, they used to teach you have to say this prayer 3 times to open your records. I did that for a long time. I don't do it as much anymore, but it's soothing to me. It almost feels like a a chant or a mantra. So sometimes I actually will still do that if I'm going in for the collective and I just really want to get into a great space and just be super clear and open. Like I've done it so much at this point. I find it very soothing and grounding, though it's not necessary to do that to go into the records. But if you're starting out, I think it's a great way to just allow yourself to get into that energy and to like really kind of give yourself a little bit of time to feel like you're moving into the records. There's lots of prayers out there, or probably lots of intentions that somebody else wrote about somewhere on the internet. Google it if you are interested, or buy a book. Just make sure they're a trusted source who sounds like they've been doing this for a while. But I don't think you need anything special either. It could just be something like, I asked for my guide support and I asked for the support of my records. It's my intention to step into my Akashic records. And may I be supported in doing so. And may what comes through be for the highest good and for my highest good. Help me receive it into my heart today. Like you can write out something that makes sense to you. And then the last thing that I suggest having is the intention that you want when you go into the records. Because oftentimes if you just try and step in and you haven't grounded the energy at all and you don't know what you're looking for, it's really overwhelming. You might not even know if you're in them. So a nice thing to start with is just to ask, can you give me an image or give me some because information comes through in different ways for different people. For me, I see a lot of imagery. So I will say, give me an image that helps me understand I'm in my records right now. So I will usually get an opening image, kind of a landing point that I can kind of land on energetically and go from there. But sometimes I'll just say, help me see where I'm at today. You might ask, what do I need to know about today? You might have a specific question, but a nice place is just to ask for an image. Could you give me an image to help me know I'm in my own records? Can you give me something to help me know what do I records want me to know right now today? Something very simple. And then I suggest having your journal and just writing down whatever came through. And if nothing came through, that's okay too. But writing down any perceptions, any images, anything that you felt, anything that you experienced. Maybe you feel like a lot came through and you just allow yourself to free write anything that you received. Maybe you're not sure it worked at all, but the rest of the day, you notice that you keep seeing like 22s and 44s and 33s and all these angel numbers. And you feel like really empowered, like that you want to go back in and try it again. There is so many ways to work with the records and to feel confirmation that you are working at resonating and activating those frequencies in your life. And so if it's not immediate, that's okay. Just ask for some signs and synchronicities during the day. It could also take you a while to figure out how your records are presenting themselves to you. Oftentimes, if people heard like the records are like a big giant library and they're like, I don't feel anything like that when I've tried to go in. But, maybe they notice that every time they've tried to open their records, they don't see a library. Maybe they see like a big tree, like the tree from the movie Avatar, and there's all these lights on it. And they're like, I never get a library. I just keep seeing this tree. But tell that person that tree is your landing point. It's how your records, for some reason, are presenting themselves to you. That actually, I've never heard somebody say that, but I just love this idea. Trees, I've heard, are Akashic Records keepers here on Earth because they live so long and they have so much knowledge stored into them. And they are such wise beings and so timeless. So if something consistently comes through for you and the way that I say it or somebody else taught you doesn't make sense, or maybe you just see colors or stars, just pay attention to what do you see. And then if you're really, really struggling, I'm going to recommend that you create an image that represents your records to you. So use your imagination. And so if you want to think about stepping into a library or you want to think about stepping into the cosmos, use your imagination. Call it your home base. You're going to create this Akashic home base. And when you're saying your prayer, tell spirit, I'm having a tough time accessing you. So I'm going to imagine that I step into a library whenever I'm opening the records. And that's going to be my cue to you when I'm visualizing that I'm actively going into the records. Just let spirit know this is how I'm going to understand the Akashic for now until it changes, and use that as your touchstone. And so when you say your prayer and you set your intention, then you imagine that you're stepping into whatever it is that you've chosen as that access point. And then imagine you're fully in it. And then you can ask, give me an image to help me know I'm in the records. You can also say, help me understand how my records speak to me. Maybe you are different. You probably are different. Not maybe you are. You are different. And so it could be a completely different way. All right. I think that about brings us to time today. I hope this gave you some ideas for how to feel empowered to make the records more approachable for you, and something that you feel you have the right to have not only knowledge of, but just feel like you can access. You know, just because we have access to these things, maybe you have a really developed gift. I will often do my own readings when I think to tap in anymore. But I actually find a lot of value. I've not been to somebody who does readings in a long time. I haven't found anybody I felt called to, but I definitely will avail myself of working with other spiritual practitioners who are gifted, who have different methods of intuition, especially when I feel like I'm seeing the same things, or I might be getting in my own way, because it can be hard sometimes to interpret our own information. So we can always feel empowered to say, I can do it myself, and I can get feedback from somebody else who might be more objective, or who might not be as attached to the situation. And so they're going to see things from a different perspective. So just because we might ask somebody else for help doesn't mean we still can't feel empowered to grow as much as we can within our own understanding. And one of the big things that the record said for all of us in the year 2023 is that sort of this idea that the age of the guru is over, the age of feeling like there's one person who kind of knows everything. And certainly no disparity to anybody who is really in a position where they have developed an expertise and they are kind of known in the field for bringing that information through. The records are really clear on that. There are many individuals who are called to the path of a spiritual teacher and who will develop a sense of expertise, and naturally people are going to look to them as an expert in that area because they've amassed such a body of work and they're walking their talk, and they just really are tapped into that part. So that's not what they're talking about here. They were talking about the idea, though, that this age, the guru, as they called it, was not only where somebody was the expert, but there was sort of this belief that because other people held this expertise, that somehow they knew more than you did, or were maybe more elevated than somebody else might be because of those reasons. And the record said, don't check your soul sovereignty at the door. Don't do that. We can always learn from each other. We can always inspire each other and say, it is so cool they have that gift. I want to keep developing that in myself. That's so okay to do. We can learn from each other, but don't check your soul sovereignty and feel like if you're interested in any of these spiritual things that we talk about, the records, the angels, astrology, intuition, any of that, don't feel like somebody else has cornered the market on it because they've been doing it longer. If you're interested, claim it for yourself and say, maybe I'm an apprentice at this. I'm starting out, I'm a student of this, but I want to take this into my matrix and I want to learn a lot and become the best I can be at it because I'm so interested in this. So feel empowered to work with your records and to see yourself not only as worthy of working with those energies, but absolutely capable. You are equipped on a soul level to work with your own records and to be in that energy. After all, they're your records. So with that, Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Next week, we are going to be talking about making peace when it's hard to let go. And we're going to look at ideas around forgiveness. How do we make peace in situations where it's really difficult to make peace and something's really unfair, or we're just having a hard time like relaxing our grip and just letting it go? How do we maybe work with the term forgiveness? That's kind of a tough one for some people. How can we maybe understand that in an even bigger way and redefine that for ourselves? How can we find some measure of peace when something's ongoing? And so we want to let go, but it keeps getting activated. And so we're kind of stuck in energy that we don't want to be stuck in. So we're going to look into all of that and see what guidance comes through from the Akashic. And I've got a few ideas on more of a psychological level, and we'll see what wants to share itself with us in that episode. So until then, have an absolutely amazing week and be well, be love, be you, and be magic.
You've been listening to Your Heart Magic with Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Tune in next week for a new episode to support and empower your light.